So, welcome to this episode of Menopause Conversations. I'm really, really delighted to have our next guest on, who is Kate Moryoussef. Hello, Kate. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you for joining me today. I was just saying to Kate how, sometimes you really want to have a very important conversation with somebody, but you don't just want to drop into their messages and appear like you're asking off of the bat. But actually, that is actually what happened. And you were very gracious to say that you would come on. You probably will see Kate on your own social grid. She's a transformational wellbeing and empowerment coach specializing in ADHD and women's emotional health. She's also an accredited EFT, which stands for Emotional Freedom Technique practitioner, and an advocate for neurodivergent women. And when you watch Kate's podcast, she has the most amazing guests on. But what resonates massively through the screen is that passion for helping those people and supporting those navigating the intersection of ADHD and perimenopause. But you also have some exciting news too, which is that you have a book coming out, which I'm hugely excited about. I shall be going straight on a pre-order, and that's called the ADHD Women's Wellbeing Toolkit. So we'll get into a little bit more about that. But I suppose thinking about neurodiversity, breaking free from self-doubt, and thriving with confidence are probably your daily mantras. It's a pleasure to have you, Kate. I'd love to know more about how you got into this space, if you could share with us.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, first the book that if someone told me 5 years ago that I'd be writing a book on a specialist subject, I would be totally like in disbelief for sure, because my self-esteem, my confidence was really, at the lowest ebb after being at home and having four kids and kind of navigating work and feeling exhausted and burnt out and always feeling like I just need a lot of decompression time. I just never quite understood so many different parts of me. Like I really just couldn't quite piece together. And then it was when my then 9-year-old daughter, my middle daughter, we were going through that process of getting her an ADHD diagnosis. We'd gone through different kind of assessments with regards to sort of dyslexia and dyscalculia and dyspraxia and all the different sort of things that I just couldn't put my finger on. And back then, that was 5 years ago, so things were very difficult. Everything was separate, and if you didn't have one, then they'd just sort of be like, well, you haven't got it, and then goodbye. No one kind of then said to you, well, what about this, or why don't you try that? The word neurodivergence wasn't really even coined then. We weren't even using these words. It was either you're dyslexic or you're not, you've got ADHD or you haven't, you're autistic or you're not. And that was it. So it was definitely this kind of eye-opening moment of, oh, okay, so I could really relate to what my daughter was going through and how she is. And I could sort of see myself in her as a child, but I could see how it presented in different ways throughout my life. And then we ended up getting a diagnosis, within a few weeks of each other. This was in the middle of the pandemic. This was November 2020, and it changed the course of my life. It really did. From then I was retraining to be a coach, an EFT practitioner. I'd done NLP training. I was doing all the training, but what was the problem was that I didn't know who I was speaking to, because I wanted to speak to people who were like me, but I didn't have the words. So I was like, are you overwhelmed? Are you exhausted? Are you scattered? I was like using all these different words, kind of like they were personality defects, as opposed to, like anything else. And also, at the age of 40, mid-pandemic, homeschooling, I was feeling more and more anxious. My cycle was all over the place. I was feeling just not myself at all, which I put down to the fact that we were going through a global pandemic and I was
Yeah.
homeschooling, which, so many women said, who everyone's anxious, everyone's exhausted and depleted. But it was different. I could feel something different in my body. And what I then realized, I was at the beginning stages of perimenopause at the age of 40, which again, now we know that neurodivergent women tend to go through an earlier perimenopause, and tend to feel their symptoms earlier than neurotypical women. So, and we're a lot more sensitive in our bodies and our hormones and our nervous system. So, of course, any change, any shifts or hormonal fluctuations, we're going to feel them much more, much stronger. So that was all happening. So it was, for me, there was just this huge unfolding. And I realized that if I didn't have the resources, there was a lot of other women going through this as well. And that's when I started my podcast, the ADHD Women's Wellbeing Podcast. And I started coaching, speaking to lots of people, more training. And yeah, 3.5 years later, we're here with, a podcast that's been, out for 3 years, over 2.5 million downloads, women desperately seeking more
Yes.
information. And now this book that's come out, because it's a sign of the times. It's not this ADHD, like everyone's got ADHD, everyone wants medication. It isn't that. It's women finally getting answers, finally getting the understanding of who they are, why they are the way they are, why their parents were their parents, why they see this genetically and through the generations, why this isn't just a trend from social media. And it's a huge validation for many, many women who have been left dismissed and invalidated and shunted to the sidelines by doctors who've just not been able to give them, the diagnosis that they deserve. So yeah, very long-winded answer.
No,
There you go.
fascinating. I love it. And we obviously share a passion. So I'm an NLP coach and practitioner as well. And I think it's hugely useful as a toolkit
Yeah.
during this time. I just did a previous podcast I said to you before with a comedian, and she said, I mean, I think it's just symptomatic generally of how women can be treated when in the realms of the medical profession, we're sort of dismissed. It's like, oh, so you say you're hot, but is that, do you need to take your cardigan off, which is what my
Yes.
previous guest just said to me. No, it's not that I'm hot, I feel anxious. Oh right, so you need an antidepressant. No, I don't need an antidepressant. Okay, then so what do you need? And it's like this bounce, 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 bounce. Actually, we can't really do anything for you. So I think this is often what women are up against. My blood pressure goes up when I go anywhere near my doctor's surgery because of
Mm.
how I have been treated in the past. So I think for lots of women, and we don't even know how to articulate, finding words is really difficult, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
To sort of substantiate how we're feeling. So then we start to convince ourselves, well, that's not helpful to anybody else. So maybe I just
Mm.
won't go and say anything at all. So how does, if you can help us understand, how does perimenopause almost spotlight ADHD in that way? Or is ADHD spotlighting perimenopause? Do you have a
Yeah.
view on that, Kate?
Yeah, it's interesting that, because there's definite, like, one exacerbates the other on both sides for sure. Um, I mean, from what I know and from speaking to lots of experts, and because the research is still fairly new and we need a huge amount more, I'm speaking to people who are on the ground, psychiatrists, going to global conventions and speaking to world leaders, and the consensus is that more research needs to be done. But what we do know is that hormone fluctuations in neurodivergent women seem to be more extreme. And when we have these hormonal fluctuations, whether it's our menstrual cycles, postnatally, puberty, and perimenopause, it impacts our brain and our nervous system. And our nervous system, it is very integral to all of this. It's not just, a dopamine thing. But what's really interesting, and if people are listening now and they want to learn more about hormones, I've just had an incredible episode recently with ADHD hormone expert Adele Wimsett. And we talk, actually, there's a lot of conversation about ADHD and estrogen
Mm.
and dopamine. And that has been the very sort of traditional conversation. And progesterone has been sort of sidelined a little bit because there seems to be a global trauma of women who have been put on synthetic progestin, such as the Mirena coil, birth control, that type of thing, that it hasn't agreed with them. But what we do know, and again, I urge you to listen to this episode, because progesterone is actually a very important hormone for neurodivergent women. But what a lot of us haven't understood in the past is that if we are going through perimenopause and we're still on synthetic progesterone through the Mirena coil, it's not the same as, say, the estrogen, progesterone, which is body identical. Now, what I know I'm backtracking, going all over the place, but what I'm trying to say is that progesterone needs to be part of the conversation
Definitely.
as part of understanding perimenopause, but also understanding how it can help our ADHD, because it's calming, it's anti-anxiety, it regulates our nervous system, it's improved sleep, and it helps with gut health, it helps with lots of other, health in our body, breast health. There's lots of things that that they're sort of finding, and these are typically the first symptoms of a very difficult perimenopause. The anxiety, the nervous system
Yes.
dysregulation, the lack of sleep. A lot of people talk about bloating and not being able to tolerate certain foods properly.
Yes.
So progesterone needs to be talked about a lot more, because we need to get the fluctuations, we need to get the levels right. And unfortunately, a lot of doctors don't know this. So if you want to learn more about this, go back and listen to this. My social media just went crazy because all these women were going, so you mean my PMDD, my postnatal depression,
Yes.
my anxiety during perimenopause could potentially have been rectified because I was on the wrong progesterone or synthetic progesterone? And Adele is saying, yes, synthetic progestins are going to be exacerbating your symptoms overall. And I just want to mention PMDD, because PMDD, it's something like, and I'm probably going to say the wrong statistic, but it's something like 50% more prevalent in neurodivergent women. And that is because we are seeing vast progesterone and estrogen fluctuations and imbalances. So some people think that ADHD in women can be rectified, not just with like medication or a stimulant, but with hormonal balance. And so I think it's so important that we have this conversation, because if you've got a child, especially a girl who is going through puberty, or you had issues after pregnancy, anything like that, your cycle, instead of saying, right, straight away I need ADHD medication, which yes can be very helpful, or anti-anxiety meds, anything like that, it's like, no, let's start looking at our hormones
Yes.
and see if that helps, because no one mentioned that to me. But what I did notice is, thankfully, because I was on the podcast and had lots of great contacts, I spoke to an amazing doctor, Dr. Emma Ping, who is a perimenopause ADHD expert. And she helped me go on HRT at the age of 41, even though everyone was like, what do you mean you're on HRT? And she was so kind, because I had a real fear of progesterone because I didn't know any of this. And we started it and we tweaked it. But actually, my progesterone I've taken really quite high, and it's
Yes.
been the best thing ever. It's been calming, anti-anxiety. I've been sleeping better than ever. And my ADHD is still there, 100% still there, but it's not as debilitating as it was. So I would say to people who are listening right now is like, really get to grips with your hormones and really advocate for yourself, to speak to someone who gets it, who understands hormones, and don't be pushed back. If one doctor says no, print out the research, listen to the podcasts, and be like, no, you don't palm me off on synthetic progestins anymore. I need something different. It's not easy, and we've got still a long way to go, but we've got more answers than we had a long time ago.
Yeah, that's so true. I'm just holding space for myself because that is exactly the experience I had. And I used to sell hormone replacement therapy. I also understand that it's the ratios that are important. We
Yeah.
don't actually know what the levels are, but the ratios that there's an amazing person, Paula Rastrick, who
Yes.
has researched so much of this. And I've looked at Paula's research, and we know that relationship between our hormones and our neurotransmitters, as you say, progesterone is GABA driving. estrogen is glutamate driving. They have different things. One's acceleratory, one's more of the brake and that reserved and quiet and calmness that you described. I know myself that I was on the contraceptive pill. We know also that synthetic progestins don't help with your bone formation. You know,
Mm.
the earlier you're on them, the less natural bone formation and turnover we're getting. And the reality is we can get that sensitivity. And I was one of those in my
Yeah.
perimenopause. They tried to put me on something I'd been on in my 20s, had the most horrendous reaction. And like you, I experienced just being over estrogenized. Like there was
Yeah.
this compulsion to like, let's just go in with the estrogen. What I've actually found is because I'm also histamine intolerant, which
Yeah.
also lots of people with PMDD have histamine
And
intolerance and
neurodivergent as well.
neurodivergent. We've got to
Yeah.
be really, really careful because histamine will naturally up your levels. Like at the moment, I told a story last year, and most people, my social media went mad in that when hay fever season comes along, I actually don't need to take any estrogen
Hmm.
because histamine is like a conjoined twin of estrogen. If it rises in your bloodstream, so does your estrogen naturally. And so
Mm.
women, I'm about to try and do a survey where women to talk about breast tenderness, to talk about bloating. We see
Hmm.
this dramatically increases the moment tree pollen kicks in. And I had a blood test to confirm it. I didn't take any estrogen and I had normal levels of estrogen throughout the whole summer months.
Wow.
So it's fascinating. So I'm doing my own research on this as well. So I
That's
think it's
interesting.
multifaceted. If we were to ask more questions, like you said, Kate, connecting those dots, which is let's not just take the first symptom. Let's ask questions that sort of pervade that circle. Let's ask, have you got any recent allergies? Are you allergic to medication? So I became allergic to ibuprofen, aspirin overnight. I have an anaphylactic reaction to that now. So
Wow.
the reality is, like yourself, I was a complete mess. I had a 2-year old. I had one child, and that was like trying to navigate that. But everything was palmed off as anxious first time mother. Anxious
Yeah.
first time mother. Do you need a holiday? That was the thing that was most said to me most frequently. I think need a holiday, need a break. Could your husband do more? It was that sort
Mm.
of thing. So I think you're absolutely right. I think so many of us just feel lost. There's these conflicting pieces of information. It's like, what do you trust? What do you lean into? It just feels like this whole soup of stuff
Yeah.
that feels overwhelming. And I think you described it really, really nicely from your own position. It's not one thing. It can feel like everything at some times. So I suppose the next question then is
Sorry,
hormones and that's okay.
the
That's okay.
dog.
It's real life. It's real life. Is the dog okay? Hormones and executive function. Many women report that the ADHD symptoms worsen. I mean, I would really like to, even now, just give what is the definition of ADHD. I don't want to assume people listening to this necessarily know what that is. If we're going to help people connect the dots, in your definition, and I know that there's a DSM which tells us what the definition is
Mm.
and assessments, etc. I really hope they start updating that sometime very, very soon. But what is the definition of ADHD? And what would you say for someone listening to this? Here are some very key things that you might be recognizing as traits.
Yeah. So it's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which two words, deficit and disorder, I mean, straight away, it's just like negative connotations, which is what fills people with shame.
Yes.
Straight away, it's like, well, I've got a disorder and a deficit. That is awful. And I remember when I was diagnosed, I was ashamed. I was like, what do you mean? This is awful. Why have I got this? And even though I'd grown up and my brothers were diagnosed with it, but I did not look like my brothers when they were diagnosed in childhood. They were the very typical, in different ways, hyperactive, difficult to manage, chaotic. They would struggled a lot in school. Teachers couldn't manage them. Impulsivity, aggression. And that was very much sort of like a male presenting, even though they had anxiety and things like that, and lots of self-esteem issues, it was more internalized for boys. Whereas for girls, the ADHD, which is why it's so missed, it's really, really is that it often presents as internalized. So all the hyperactivity is internalized and comes out as anxiety, overthinking, worry, anxiousness, not sleeping, restlessness. You might see an ADHD girl sort of tapping her foot, fiddling with her bracelets, twirling her hair, looking out the window, talking really fast, darting from one conversation to another. A big part of ADHD is RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria. So you might notice that that you have felt always very sensitive in friendships and relationships and dynamics, and felt like maybe you were always on the periphery, or felt like a perceived feeling of rejection or criticism, even if it wasn't, even if it wasn't sort of direct. You might have sort of perceived it and then internalized it and then sort of inflated it in your own head. And that probably may have had lots of impact on friendships and relationships and family dynamics. And so there's so much that, people don't understand. There's a much higher risk of addiction, eating disorders, depression, OCD, sadly, suicide, and suicide ideation. So this is a very serious condition. We're not talking, this is not just being a bit messy and being a bit chaotic and disorganized and forgetting things, which it can present itself. I'm forever losing my keys. The running joke is, where's mum's phone? Because I will put my phone down in a cupboard or in the fridge or on a shelf. And my husband's like, why'd you put it down? I was like, do you think I know I've put my phone down? Do you think I actively want to put the phone in the dining room cupboard when I'm looking for something? And then the whole house is sort of looking for my phone. So it causes a huge amount of exhaustion as well, mental, like, just drained by yourself, that you can't, you feel you're scattered, and you want to be organized, and you don't want to be forgetful, and you don't want to be running late. You kind of, it feels like you're fighting against yourself a lot. That it would be great to walk out the house 10 minutes earlier. It would be great to not do things last minute. It would be great not to overcommit and maybe have better boundaries. But sometimes, and again, this comes with self-awareness, we kind of start understanding ourselves. But when we don't have that self-awareness, we're just chasing,
Yes.
and not quite understanding. And I think a lot of women, especially when they get this diagnosis later on in life, it gives them an understanding, gives them a moment to pause and reflect. And instead of kind of going on this robot mode, which we've been doing all our lives, we get to have a moment and go, right, what is that, my ADHD? Like, what's it saying? Is that thought real? Is that person really leaving me out? Was that a real criticism? Why am I people pleasing here? And we notice, like, if there's perfectionist traits, what am I overcompensating for? Like, why am I trying to make this so perfect? Am I trying to prove myself from like childhood stuff? So it kind of opens up this huge can of worms, but in a good way, because we're able to self-reflect more and make better choices. So, like I said before, the ADHD doesn't go away. It just gives us more tools and resources to look after ourselves better, which is a big passion of mine, is like helping women who are finally understanding themselves thrive, like finally live better, with more awareness and education, as opposed to, that's me, I'm just really forgetful, I'm always late, I'm chaotic, I'm the chaotic, dysfunctional, disorganized one, which a lot of women have kind of lived in that story of themselves. That's their persona.
Yes.
But it's not a fun persona to live in, but a lot of people just put them and say, right, you're the chaotic one, you're the one that's like always forgetting things, and you're the one that brings all the spice to the party, but there might be lots of other kind of chaos with it. Maybe we don't want to live like that anymore, or maybe we really enjoy that, some of it, we love some of the ADHD side that makes us enthusiastic and caring and empathetic and all of that. But maybe there's parts of us that we're just ready to let go of now and choose differently. And I think that's what gives the diagnosis gives a lot of people more inner peace and emotional freedom to choose differently. And that's what I love to, empower women with.
Yeah, and I really, really love that. I have in my coaching practice, I have had a number of people who've said to me, I've done the online assessment and I didn't come out as ADHD. It's very binary, which I don't think is very
Mm,
helpful because I sort of see it like I had a guest on who knew herself. She hasn't had a formal diagnosis, but she knows that she has autism.
mhm.
And has a family member who has autism. So that's one of my previous guests. But she said, I didn't realize how perimenopause would impact that. I thought my autism was getting worse. And I
Yeah.
think this is where it starts to get really messy for people, even more when you're trying to get answers, because we know that there's a lot of crossover between ADHD,
Yeah.
autism, and trauma. That's
Yeah.
something I find really interesting. I'll be open. I've done an online assessment myself. But it's interesting. I'm one of the most organized people I know, so I don't feel any of the criteria for the first six questions.
Mm,
I don't lose anything, but possibly in the second lot,
mm.
I tick an awful lot. A lot of the things that you've mentioned, like the overthinking, justice sensitivity, I would say is off the charts,
Yeah, me too.
and rejection sensitivity. But of course, at 53, I've just thought I honestly have had no reason to rethink that. But I think what's unhelpful is when you do an online assessment, it goes negative. And you go,
Mm,
well, what is it then? And I know I'm taking HRT. I know I'm doing all the things that are balancing out. But I still think we have so much more. I think it needs to be redefined, first of all,
yeah,
because, like you say, it's
100%.
really, really 100% unhelpful. Why would anyone say, yeah, I'll take that label? Thanks very much. Knowing how much bias is out there. I mean, we already see
Mm,
that bias. So I agree with that. And I think it's probably then comes to the sort of role of what you do then, because actually asking that question, what does a diagnosis give me? It might give you something, it might give you that validation, it might not, it might even make you more anxious. But working with a coach like yourself, can you sort of explain to us how you do work with people? So let's say someone says, you know what, I haven't had a formal diagnosis, but I do see a lot of these traits. They are quite disabling for me in my life. I find, really impacting my well-being. What tools and resources do you work with people to give them, Kate?
yeah. So I spent many years coaching one to one. And as things have got busier with the podcast and writing my book, I would say my big passion is helping more people on a greater scale because I love working one to one. But as a neurodivergent woman myself, I know I have finite energy, and it takes a lot of my, like you say, this justice sensitivity. I like very much invested in people. So I was thinking, right, how can I help more people in an hour? So I've now got between March and July a series of workshops. And I really thought long and hard about all the topics. And then I got my audience and my newsletter to vote their favorite ones. So I really got on the ground and asked, the people who follow me, what do you want to hear from me? So we whittled it down to 7 workshops.
Wow.
I've tried to make it as accessible as possible, cost effective as possible. And so we've got 2 a month between March and July. And then I'm going to have an Ask Me Anything session as well with that. So if you buy all the workshops in one go, you'll get all the reminders, you get the emails, you get the recordings, and then you get the Q&A with me in July. And that way I was thinking, right, I can speak to more women in one go. I'm able to target the conversation, the topics. We're talking about things like RSD, anxiety, nervous system regulation. We're talking about relationships and finding more joy and fulfillment. I've really tried to give this broad spectrum of the impact ADHD has on women's day-to-day life and really helping navigate certain topics. So yes, I know an hour's not a huge amount of time, but a lot of people, come to me and say, I'd love to work with you, but I can't afford to. I'd love to work with you, but I'm waiting for access to work to come through. And that's
Yeah,
not
takes forever.
happening.
No.
Yeah. So I was thinking about how can I make this a way that more women can have like my direct help. And so, yeah, so if people are interested, you can go on my website, sign up. And if there's any of the workshops that have already happened between, by the time this comes out, there might be one or two in March that have happened. You'll get the recording anyway if you sign up for the all access
Brilliant.
pass. So yeah, that is what I'm focusing on now. Obviously, I've got the book coming out in July, so that it's available for pre-order now. The audio book, I recorded that. That was oh my
Oh,
God,
brilliant.
I had
Well,
to go
I
to
love audiobooks. I can consume an audiobook in one long car journey. So that's
yeah.
like amazing.
Yeah, so I kind of thought, right, people listen to me on the podcast and thought, right, like how I really want to connect with them through, audio as well. And yeah, so I want my work to be on a greater scale now, helping more people, because I value the ripple effect of coaching one person, but if I can coach, through a
Yes,
workshop or a
makes
podcast
sense.
or a book, it's vital this information gets out there. I think that's my big thing is we need more women to feel empowered so they can advocate for themselves, push back against doctors if they're not getting the answers, ask for what they need, support and mentor other women, and help their children. So as women are very resourceful and we are strong and determined, but we need help. We need help. So if I hadn't had mentorship from other amazing women, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing now. And I'm sure you're doing an amazing job mentoring loads of people. And then what you're teaching people, it's like a ripple effect.
Definitely.
And that is what we have to create here, because there's a movement of women who have systematically and historically been left, been dismissed, been not listened to, and the tide is changing, and the healthcare system has to manage this and keep up and change the way things are. And without starting to get my feminist high horse about the patriarchy, which I do
I
very
know.
often, this is a hangover from that male doctors have not seen the importance of research on women's health, that women have been sort of conditioned to suffer, that we just have to get on with it, and this is just what happens, hormones and menopause. The amount of women who've contacted me and said, I've had hysterectomies and I don't think I needed to have had that
Ugh.
hysterectomy because I needed someone to understand my hormonal fluctuations. I've got someone in my family who I know is neurodivergent, and she had a hysterectomy with very little hormonal support, and unfortunately for her, it's been downhill ever since. So we need more women saying a hysterectomy is not,
No, thank you.
yeah,
Why wouldn't you think this was menopause? Why wouldn't you think this was ADHD?
yeah,
Why are we
yeah.
going straight for that?
Yeah, and unfortunately, so many generations of women have suffered with their mental health, with their emotional well-being, with their energy, with their sleep, with their cognition. Like you said, you help keep women in work. Women in their 40s, 50s, and 60s are in their prime. We are strong, courageous beings with so much to offer and so much to do in this world. But if we're being, debilitated by hormones and lack of sleep and low energy and all the things that our hormones can bring, that we can't serve and we can't help more people. And I think, that is what is most important. So we need to advocate for ourselves, empower ourselves with this education and this awareness, and then carry on doing what we're here to do. Loads of us are on a mission to make this world better. But
Definitely. And I think it's changing that narrative of surviving doesn't trump thriving,
yeah,
basically.
yeah,
We need to, and so many young people. I have lots of conversations, when we do presentations and the room is emptying, it's nearly always men and younger women who stay behind to say, it's a terrifying prospect. It all seems doom and gloom. But I think through the work that we're doing in the agency, that we're sort of encouraging with people, is it's actually to stand in your power. Knowledge is power. Where you get your knowledge from is really, really important. And I do love that about your podcast, like the sort of guests that you get really know their stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's really empowering for people. So I definitely will look up the guests that you mentioned, because I think that is important. Nothing exists in isolation. That is not how nature works. And so I think the more that we can sort of get those Venn diagrams crossing over and going, okay, what's that intersection like for people? Being involved in research is a really passionate project for me currently, helping shape what the next big research grants look like for women.
Yeah.
Why do we just need to look at the hormones? Why aren't we looking at, how confident do people feel as they go through perimenopause to postmenopause? How empowered do they feel? We know that the highest group of women starting businesses for the first time are those in their 50s. What's that all about?
Wow,
So
that's so
so
cool.
yeah, so I think you're right. I think we need to expand the lens, take more of it in, but actually leave no one behind, because some companies have latched onto the fact that the 50 somethings have so much to offer. And I said
Hmm.
this on to a previous guest, which is I read a great book. I'm reading a great book about the history of menopause. And when we date back to the times of Genghis Khan, Genghis Khan's stepmother raised the whole family of brothers when his father had died. It was unheard of in the Mongol tribes for that to take place. And what we know is, biologically, we are the only species that lives this long after our reproductive years is finished. Why is that? It's not
Hmm.
by chance. There is a definite nature choice, and it's because we have so much wisdom. Orca whales, elephants, we've got so much more to offer, but I think we feel so much smaller, or can feel smaller, during perimenopause, that for some of us it feels like that's what it's going to be like.
Hmm.
Unless we sort of hear podcasts like your own, people talking about that the brain does expand. Professor, Dr. Lisa Mosconi talking about that, how the emerging science around expansion of brains, yes, we have an expansion of brain in puberty, but we also have one in postmenopause also. So I think these things, if we can just be curious about it,
Hmm.
and that's the medics, the people experiencing it themselves, our younger people. I really liked what you said about, you know, medication is helpful, but there is always a side effect profile with that. So risk versus benefits. If we can get other things lined up, like elongating the second part of your menstrual cycle, so you do have more progesterone available,
Hmm.
stress management techniques, that's amazing. I mean, before we finish, could you just tell us a little bit about EFT and
Yeah.
what EFT is, so that if people don't know what that is?
Yeah. So EFT is emotional freedom technique. You might have heard of tapping. It's something I'm really passionate about. It's something I trained in and has helped me so much in my personal life, but it's also helped me with my kids.
Okay.
I first looked into, way before my ADHD diagnosis, for anxiety relief, for worry, for overthinking, for ruminating, that thought loop that you just can't get rid of. Way before I knew that it was all connected to ADHD and my very fast, restless brain of mine.
Yes.
And it's like it's been made for neurodivergent brains. And when I got my diagnosis, I started going down this rabbit hole and I realized that no one was really making this connection. So I actually wrote a couple of articles for Attitude magazine,
Yes. I love that
which
magazine.
yeah, and it's brilliant. It's an incredible resource for ADHD. And it is so helpful if you get stuck in a thought loop, or you have trauma, or you are just in that place where you need clarity and self-doubt's overriding you. And so what it is, if people have never heard of it, it looks a bit strange, but you're tapping on meridian points around your face and your hands and your chest and around your back. And these are kind of energy systems in your body that sort of been identified for thousands of years in sort of Eastern medicine. So it's sort of along the lines of acupuncture or
Yes.
reflexology. But you kind of combine it with like a CBT style Western psychology of, it's about acceptance. It's about understanding where you are right now, accepting where you are right now, stating that you feel tired, exhausted, angry, sad, whatever that might be, anxious, bringing it up, allowing it to come while we're tapping on these points, which simultaneously are calming your nervous system. So if you go to talk therapy and you just talk about how dreadful life is, you can feel very activated and
Yes.
almost feel worse sometimes because, yes, you've talked about it, but your nervous system still feels very hypervigilant. So with tapping, you're talking and you're accepting and you're leaning into the discomfort, but the tapping calms and regulates you and allows a part of your brain to see more perspective. And you're telling your amygdala that it's safe. You're safe right now. So it's very unique and it has incredible results. People use it for so many things. Like genuinely, there's incredible studies out there for helping with menopause, with cancer treatment, with chronic pain, with postnatal depression. So many amazing things that you can use it for. But I've used it genuinely just to have a rant, to reduce anxiety, to help my children if they're going through something difficult. I've got lots of resources on my website about it, paid for ones
Excellent.
and free ones. So if you're
Yes.
interested, go and look at the free resources, because if you're open to it, some people are just like, oh, I'm not doing that tapping thing. It's very strange. But if you're a bit open-minded and you fancy it, it's a really good therapy for yourself. Like it's really good that you can do at home. You don't need to do it, you just have to sort of practice and know where the meridian
Yes.
are. And you can tap along. I've got videos that you can do tap along therapy as well. So I love it, and a lot of people who I've worked with really love it as well. So you can
Yeah.
obviously tell I'm very enthusiastic about it. As long
Yeah,
as it works,
yeah,
it works.
and I do it myself too, and I would agree with you. It is lovely, and it's a bit like in the way that mindfulness, or just being present. When you just feel completely present with something, and that
Yeah.
letting go-ness that you describe, it is beautiful. So yes, that's amazing. So we'll put those all in the show notes. So as we sort of come to an end, it's always the way, isn't it? It's sort of like time hurtles by. How can people be more in contact with you and your work, Kate? Where can they find you?
Yeah, so I mean, you can probably find me anywhere, ADHD Women's Wellbeing. So I've got the podcast.
Yes.
The book is available now on pre-order. That's the ADHD Women's Wellbeing Toolkit, available, wherever you get books. And my website, which has got all my resources, which is adhdwomenswellbeing.co.uk. If you head there, everything is on there. Lots of workshops as well. So if you are just wanting to dive in a little bit more, I've got lots of workshops that are an hour long, 30 odd quid. And I've tried to create a library of resources for people who are maybe on a waiting list, or maybe can't see a doctor, or live in a place where ADHD specialists just aren't available, and trying to help give you those tools. I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a therapist, I can't diagnose you, but what I can do is kind of empower you with more awareness and more education and resources, so you don't feel as alone or disempowered as you probably have done over the years. So yeah, I hope that through all of those, lots of free resources as well, so don't
Yes.
be afraid to take those up as well.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I'm absolutely convinced your book is going to fly off the shelves. I certainly will be looking to get the audio version of that, because that's brilliant. I really would love to digest that. But for the now, thank you so much, Kate. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. We'll put all your details in the show notes. People can be in touch with you. But for now, Kate Moryoussef, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Amantha.